Hi, Jaworek School. It's me, Ms. McNichol. Welcome to episode number 28 of Goodnight Jaworek School. In tonight's episode, I'm going to share with you two stories about eggs. The first one is called After the Fall, and it's a story about Humpty Dumpty and how he got back up again. Then you'll see some friends from Jaworek School singing a Humpty Dumpty rap. And finally, you'll hear the story Horton Hatches the Egg by Dr. Seuss. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a couple of stories about eggs. And here's the story After the Fall, how Humpty Dumpty got back up again. It's written by Dan Santat. After the Fall, how Humpty Dumpty got back up again. My name is Humpty Dumpty. This was my favorite spot, high up on the wall. I know it's an odd place for an egg to be, but I loved being close to the birds. Then one day I fell. I'm sort of famous for that part. Folks called it the Great Fall, which sounds a little grand. It was just an accident, but it changed my life. Fortunately, all the King's men managed to put me back together. Kings County Hospital. Well, most of me. There were some parts that couldn't be healed with bandages and glue. After that day, I became afraid of heights. I was so scared that it kept me from enjoying some of my favorite things. I walked past the wall every day, and I would think about climbing that ladder again. I really missed the birds and being high above the city, but I could never do it because I knew that accidents can happen. I eventually settled for watching the birds from the ground. It wasn't the same, but it was better than nothing. Then one day, an idea flew by. Making planes was harder than I thought. It was easy to get cuts and scratches, but day after day I kept trying and trying until I got it just right. My plane was perfect, and it flew like nothing could stop it. I hadn't felt that happy in a long time. It wasn't the same as being up in the sky with the birds. But it was close. Close enough. Unfortunately, accidents happen. They always do. I almost walked away. But then I thought about all the time I'd spent working on my plane and all the other things I'd missed. I decided I was going to climb that wall. But the higher I got, the more nervous I felt. I didn't want to admit it. I was terrified. I didn't look up. I didn't look down. I just kept climbing, one step at a time. Until I was no longer afraid. Maybe now you won't think of me as that egg who was famous for falling. Hopefully, you'll remember me as the egg who got back up. And learned how to fly. The end.
Humpty Dumpty ran. Humpty Dumpty hum, Humpty Dumpty Dumpty Humpty Dumpty hum, Humpty Dumpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men and who ate that Humpty now? Humpty Dumpty hum, Humpty Dumpty Dumpty Humpty Dumpty hum, Humpty Dumpty Dumpty. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown and who ate that Humpty now? Humpty Dumpty hum, Humpty Dumpty Dumpty Humpty Dumpty hum, Humpty Dumpty Dumpty. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet eating her curds and whey. Along came the spider who sat down beside her and who ate that Humpty now? Humpty Dumpty hum, Humpty Dumpty Dumpty Humpty Dumpty hum, Humpty Dumpty Dumpty. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport and who ate that Humpty now? Humpty Dumpty hum, Humpty Dumpty Dumpty Humpty Dumpty hum.
Now here's the story, Horton Hatches the Egg by Dr. Seuss. Horton Hatches the Egg by Dr. Seuss. Sighed Maisie, a lazy bird hatching an egg. I'm tired and I'm bored, and I've kinks in my leg from just sitting here day after day. It's work, how I hate it. I'd much rather play. I'd take a vacation, fly off for a rest, if I could find someone to stay on my nest. If I could find someone, I'd fly away free. Then Horton the elephant passed by her tree. "Hello," called the lazy bird, smiling her best. "You've nothing to do, and I do need a rest." The elephant laughed. "Why, of all silly things, I haven't feathers and I haven't wings. Me on your egg? Why, that doesn't make sense. Your egg is so small, ma'am, and I'm so immense." "Tut, tut," answered Maisie. "I know you're not small, but I'm sure you can do it, no trouble at all. Just sit on it softly, you're gentle and kind. Come, be a good fellow, I know you won't mind." "I can't," said the elephant. "Please," begged the bird. "I won't be gone long, sir, I give you my word, I'll hurry right back." "Why, I'll never be missed." "Very well," said the elephant, "if you insist. You want a vacation? Go fly off and take it. I'll sit on your egg and I'll try not to break it. I'll stay and be faithful. I mean what I say." "Toodle-doo!" sang out Maisie, and fluttered away. The first thing to do, murmured Horton. Let's see. The first thing to do is to prop up this tree and make it much stronger. That has to be done. Before I get on it, I must weigh a ton. Then carefully, tenderly, gently he crept up the trunk to the nest where the little egg slept. Then Horton the elephant smiled. Now that's that. And he sat and he sat and he sat and he sat. And he sat all that day and he kept the egg warm, and he sat all that night through a terrible storm. It poured and it lightened, it thundered, it rumbled. This isn't much fun, the poor elephant grumbled. I wish she'd come back, 'cause I'm cold and I'm wet. I hope that Maisie bird doesn't forget. But Maisie, by this time, was far beyond reach, enjoying the sunshine way off in Palm Beach. And having such fun, such a wonderful rest, decided she'd never go back to her nest. So Horton kept sitting there day after day, and soon it was autumn. The leaves blew away, and then it came the winter, the snow and the sleet, and icicles hung from his trunk and his feet. But Horton kept sitting and said with a sneeze, I'll stay on this egg, and I won't let it freeze. I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. An elephant's faithful, 100%. So poor Horton sat there the whole winter through, and then came the springtime with troubles anew. His friends gathered round, and they shouted with glee, Look, Horton the elephant's up in a tree. They taunted, they teased him, they yelled, How absurd! Old Horton the elephant thinks he's a bird. They laughed, and they all ran away, and Horton was lonely. He wanted to play, but he sat on the egg and continued to say, I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. An elephant's faithful, 100%. No matter what happens, this egg must be tended. But poor Horton's troubles were far, far from ended. For while Horton sat there so faithful, so kind, 3 hunters came sneaking up softly behind. He heard the men's footsteps. He turned with a start. 3 rifles were aiming right straight at his heart. Did he run? He did not. Horton stayed on that nest. He held his head high and he threw out his chest, and he looked at the hunters as much as to say, Shoot if you must, but I won't run away. I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. An elephant's faithful, 100%. But the men didn't shoot, much to Horton's surprise. They dropped their 3 guns, and they stared with wide eyes. Look! They all shouted. Can such a thing be? An elephant sitting on top of a tree? It's strange. It's amazing. It's wonderful new. Don't shoot him. We'll catch him. That's just what we'll do. Let's take him alive. Why, he's terribly funny. We'll sell him back home to a circus for money. And the first thing he knew, they had built a big wagon with ropes on the front for the pullers to drag on. They dug up his tree and they put it inside, with Horton so sad that he practically cried. We're off, the men shouted, and off they all went, with Horton unhappy, 100%. Up out of the jungle, up into the sky, up over the mountains, 10,000 feet high, then down the mountains and down to the sea went the cart with the elephant, egg, nest, and tree. Then out of the wagon and onto a ship, out over the ocean, and oh, what a trip, rolling and tossing and splashed with the spray. And Horton said day after day after day, I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. But oh, am I seasick, 100%. After bobbing around for 2 weeks like a cork, they landed at last in the town of New York. All ashore, the men shouted, and down with a lurch went Horton the elephant, still on his perch, tied onto a board that could just scarcely hold him. Bump! Horton landed, and then the men sold him. Sold to a circus! Then week after week they showed him to people at 10 cents a peek. They took him to Boston, to Kalamazoo, Chicago, Weehawken, and Washington too, to Dayton, Ohio, St. Paul, Minnesota, to Wichita, Kansas, to Drake, North Dakota. And everywhere thousands of folks flocked to see and laugh at the elephant up in a tree. Poor Horton grew sadder the farther he went, but he said as he sat in the hot, noisy tent, I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. An elephant's faithful, 100%. Then, one day, the circus show happened to reach a town way down south, not so far from Palm Beach, and dawdling along, way up high in the sky, who, of all people, should chance to fly by, but that old good-for-nothing bird, Runaway Maisie, still on vacation and still just as lazy. And spying the flags in the tents just below, she sang out, "What fun! Why, I'll go to the show." And she swooped from the clouds through an open tent door. "Good gracious!" gasped Maisie. "I've seen you before." Poor Horton looked up with his face white as chalk. He started to speak, but before he could talk, there rang out the noisiest ear-splitting squeaks from the egg that he'd sat on for 51 weeks, a thumping, a bumping, a wild, alive scratching. "My egg!" shouted Horton. "My egg! Why, it's hatching!" "But it's mine!" screamed the bird when she heard the egg crack. The work was all done. Now she wanted it back. "It's my egg!" she sputtered. "You stole it from me. Get off of my nest and get out of my tree." Poor Horton backed down with a sad, heavy heart. But at that very instant the egg burst apart, and out of the pieces of red and white shell, from the egg that he'd sat on so long and so well, Horton the elephant saw something whiz. It had ears and a tail and a trunk just like his. And the people came shouting, "What's all this about?" They looked and they stared with their eyes popping out. Then they cheered and they cheered and they cheered more and more. They'd never seen anything like it before. "My goodness, my gracious," they shouted. "My word, it's something brand new. It's an elephant bird." And it should be like that, because Horton was faithful. He sat and he sat. He meant what he said, and he said what he meant. And they sent him home happy, 100%. The end. Goodnight, Jaworek School. Tonight's version of Goodnight Jaworek School is colored by Luana Falco. Luana's a second grader here at Jaworek School. Late in the evening on Hosmer Street, where all the cool kids have been tapping a beat, they'll lay in their beds, not one of them a fool, when we all say goodnight to Jaworek School. We go to class and learn something new. We chat with our friends and our teachers too. We share our school spirit. We share what we know. And just after 3 o'clock, it's time to go. In Jaworek School, at the end of the day, when all of the students have gone home to play, we close all the windows and put down our tools as we say good night to Jaworek School. Good night to the teachers. Good night to the halls. Good night to the artwork hanging on the walls. Good night to the books and our principals too. Good night to JJ, dressed all in blue. Good night to the gym where we climb and run. Good night to the playscape where we have fun. Good night to the numbers. Good night to the words. Good night to all of the stories we heard. In Jaworek School, at the end of the day, when all of the students have gone home to play, we close all the windows and put down our tools as we say good night to Jaworek School. I hope you liked your 2 stories about eggs. Dr. Seuss is quite an author, and that Humpty Dumpty, he just keeps getting back up again. Have a good night, Jaworek School.